Hello, I'm Matthew Broyles of The Matthew Show, and this is Time to Connect.
Hey, Matthew Broyles, thank you so much, man, for taking the time to connect.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for giving me a shout.
Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to this interview for sure. Are you, I'm guessing you're in Fort Worth, is that right? Or Fort Worth area?
I am indeed, yeah.
Okay, Fort
Born,
Worth
born and
proper.
raised mostly. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I live about 3 miles from where I was born.
No kidding.
Yeah, so
Wow. Wow.
and now there have been travels in between now and then, but I lived in New York for a while and then have
Right.
lived around the Metroplex, but mostly Fort Worth.
Yeah. Well, man, we have so much to talk about. To say you are
Hmm.
prolific is a ridiculous understatement. You're not only a
Yeah.
singer-songwriter, you perform under the name The Matthew Show.
Mhm.
You're also a podcast host,
Yes.
producer, novelist. You've worked in radio,
Hmm.
writer and editor of children's and nonfiction books, film reviewer, and oh yeah, you wrote, directed, produced, and acted in Rewired, a radio play. Maybe
Right.
the first question, man, is what haven't you done?
I have not done any movies. That
Yeah.
would be a fun thing to try at some point. And I know a couple of people that maybe at some point I'll be able to try that out. But
Are you saying write a script or act in it or all the
it,
above?
honestly, anything. I did
Yeah.
have a couple of folks talking about maybe trying a screenplay version of Rewired, but that's real tentative. So I don't know if it'll happen or not in my lifetime. But
Okay.
it's the vision. I'm much more with the auditory than I am with the visual.
Uh-huh.
So it's one of those things, and one of the things that is kind of a thing with me is most of it's DIY. Most of it's like I don't want to wait around for other people to do stuff, so I'm just going to do it.
Mhm.
Anything video related is harder for me to do that with because I don't have the expertise in that.
Gotcha. Yeah. Well, we're going to get into your biography a little bit, I hope, and
Yeah, sure.
I definitely want to talk about your music, and I know you've got a
Hmm.
couple other things coming up, and then I just have a bunch of random questions just to
Yeah.
pick your brain. But I guess before I ask you about your biography, what
Mhm.
maybe a weird question. What do you suppose it is about you that makes you so prolific, that makes you have your hand in so many different things and keep so busy creating?
I really think that it's this don't ever stop. So I'm always thinking about something. And so even if I'm in the middle of an album project or something, but I have a thought that's not has nothing to do with an album, I feel like I still need to do something with it. So that's why I've started this new podcast. This it's called So Here's Us on the Raggedy Edge,
Right.
because I was having all these conversations with people that I thought were really good conversations, and I thought, well, this needs to be something that other people can participate in. So, bam, started another project. Same thing with when I was, working with Fish Fry Bingo. It was a weird psychedelic hillbilly band I was in for a while, and we were kind of touring uh, breweries all over the state. But I kept having story ideas, and I was like, well, this doesn't fit in a musical context, so I'm just going to write this when I have downtime. And I also am one of those where I have to have a day job, so sometimes in day job land, you get little lulls where stuff's not going on. I can't run home, turn on my studio rig and work on it. So sometimes I'll write a little poem or a piece of prose. And so it's just always it's trying to keep this thing from eating me alive a little bit. And also I just have a lot of ideas that I think are really cool. And I feel like it would be better for me to do them than to not do them,
Yeah.
because what I don't want is to get to the end of my life and be like, God, all those ideas I had, I sure wish I'd have done something with that. Even if it doesn't set the world on fire, at the very least, it's out there.
Right. Right. Yeah. That makes me think of it's cliche, but a saying I saw the other day that says, when you come to the end of this road, you're more likely to regret the things you didn't do than the things you did do.
And I'm a hard believer in that. And I've seen too many people who've had that. One of the reasons why I've talked to so many people who are like, well, as soon as I retire, then I can start working on my creative stuff, and then, well,
Yeah,
but then
but
something
that's
happens and you don't
right.
get there, or by the time you get there, you don't have the energy to do all of that. So,
Yeah.
rather than wait, I would rather just go ahead and put it out.
Yeah.
And even if it's not perfect, that's the other thing is I have other friends who are kind of so caught up with the perfection thing, where if it's not just 100% exactly what they wanted, they just won't put it out.
Mm.
And I try not to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. I feel like if you look at the balance and it's more good than bad, I'm just going to put it out
Yeah, that's
and
great,
just
man.
and let people make their own decision.
That's great. We're similar in a lot of ways, I think. And one of my mantras is instead of always be selling, always be creating. And
Yeah,
I can't help it. I'm the same way. I'm always popping with
yeah,
ideas. Wake up in the middle of the night, and I'll be working on this, and then that comes up. But I will say, and you sort of maybe answer this question. I will say it's easy to get discouraged, especially
oh God, yeah,
today, man, because
hmm,
sometimes it feels like, I'm not one of these people who say, I wish we were back in the old days, oh,
right,
when you had to get signed by a record label and
yeah,
spend thousands and thousands of dollars to get anything recorded. No,
hmm,
but the market is completely flooded,
yep,
and and let's just be honest, a lot of the listening public doesn't have very big ears in terms of
mm,
being critical about what's good and what isn't, and so
or
it's
attention span.
our attention span.
Yeah,
And so, do you ever get discouraged? Do you ever just say, fuck,
yeah.
go fishing?
Oh, of course, of
Yeah,
course. That happens periodically because I have this little voice in the back of my head that I try to shut up most of the time when it goes, you know what? This is the one. This is the one
right.
that's going to break through, right?
Yeah,
And then, of course, you put the thing out, and I have my usual suspects who will buy it and who will talk it up and get it out there. And I have a good. I'm very lucky. I have a pretty good fan base that's always been kind to me, but it's not a huge fan base, and so every time it doesn't break through to some other level on there, there's a little moment where I go, what am I doing?
yeah, yeah.
And but then if I listen enough, I start getting emails and messages from people who go, hey man, that thing that you just did really helped me through something.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you doing it. So then I go, okay, well, that's who I'm doing it for. And of course, just to keep this from eating itself, because I've walked it through. I've quit music 3 separate times,
Uh,
and once I was like, I'm gonna stop. I'm not gonna be a musician anymore. I'm gonna be an author, right? So you go and you do that. Well, then you find out it's pretty much the same deal. You hear there's millions of books being published. You're still trying to break into a small space, and you go, well, hell, then well, I'll just go ahead and do both. Okay, I'll do a podcast. That's going to be the thing. Well, you do that, millions of podcasts out there.
oh yeah,
So really, it
yeah,
comes down to what is the thing that you can't not do. And I find that if I don't create and if I don't put things out, I don't feel good. There was a meme years ago that just said, I make things because if I don't, I'll be sad.
yeah,
And that's
yeah,
really what it comes down
yeah.
to. If I don't make stuff, I'm just sad. So I may as well
I
just do stuff.
I have to tell you that at the risk of sounding like I'm flattering you, and I'm really not. But one of the reasons I'm asking you this question is because
Mhm.
like you, I have a ton of friends who are
Mhm.
really talented, a lot of good singer-songwriters.
Oh man.
Our mutual friend Ed Rogers, who turned me
Yeah,
on to you, I love that
absolutely.
man. People like Matt Harlan in Houston. I've got
Mhm.
I've got a lot of friends who are just terrific, man. So
Mhm. Of
talented and so great. Part of that, I think, what keeps us going is that community. But
course.
but I have to say, of all the people I know, you are definitely one of those who, when I listen to your music in particular, I think, man, this guy, had he gotten the right met the right person, gotten the right breaks, had the drive to do it or whatever,
Right.
these songs could be freaking huge. Uh,
And I appreciate that. The one thing that I'm not lacking, I feel like, is assurance about the quality of what I do. I've always felt like, and I say that because I'm very picky,
mhm,
and I try not to put out crap. But I also know, like you, I know people who've been on major labels. I know people who have had like the beginnings of a big career and then it just went away.
Yeah.
Um, and it had
And
nothing to do with their talent. It had nothing to do with anything they did wrong.
yeah.
It was just the way it went. And so I don't beat myself up about, oh, this should be famous
Uh-huh.
because sometimes you look at a thing that is famous and you go, That's not so great,"
Right.
and
Right.
what's the line, like, you know, "Your boos mean nothing to me. I have seen what makes you applaud."
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
you can't I spent my 20s kind of railing against stuff that I thought sucked, right? I kinda was like, "This is terrible, and this is terrible, and you
Mhm.
all should like this." And
Yeah.
I wouldn't even talk about myself, I was talking about
Yeah.
artists that
Yeah.
I liked.
Yeah. I've been
But I
guilty.
found but I found it didn't make any difference. They liked it anyway.
That's
And
right.
so in the same way that somebody can come at me, and be like, "Well, you shouldn't like 80s era Genesis." And I'd be like, "Well, but I do like it.
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter if you are trying to shame me out of it." So
Right.
I've given all of that up and I'm just like, "Look, if anything I put out at all resonates with you in any way,
Yeah.
that's a victory for me. It doesn't matter if it pulls in millions of dollars. It would be great
Yeah.
if it pulled. I did have a guy who was, well, this has happened a number of times. I've had somebody in kind of a position that was close to people who have influence that I've sort of filtered some songs to and been like, "Hey, if you get a chance to talk to so and so, maybe, put that through to them." And they have, but it just wasn't the thing they were looking for at the time or whatever. And I've tried to sell out a couple of times. My band that I had in the 90s, the Civilians, we were trying real hard and we were starting to get like the frat parties and
Uh-huh.
you know, but I just started feeling icky about it. It didn't feel like it was me. And so that's when I pulled off and made the Matthew Show, because that's really what the Matthew Show is just saying this is the unfiltered thing that's coming out of my head, and you like it or don't. There are people who like my first couple albums but don't really care for the ones after. There are people who like the later ones and not the old ones.
Mhm.
um Everyone has their own version of the Matthew Show that they like, and
Yeah.
that's fine. But whatever you're getting out of me is going to be the honest truth of where I am at that moment,
Right on.
whether it's going to be big or not. The one of the songs that's on the new album is called "Not the Guy Himself," because I've had a career of being the guy that knows the guy that knows the guy, but I've never been the guy himself. And
Gotcha.
that's that kind of, if I was to encapsulate sort of the direction of my professional creative career, that's been what it is. I've been so close to knowing a guy that knew a guy that could get it through,
Mhm.
but just circumstance.
Yeah.
And even if I had, again, might not have lasted. Label
Right.
mergers, somebody gets thrown off.
Yeah.
It's
I have a friend who relatively recently started writing songs, and his dad was actually a pretty well-known songwriter, and he kind of resisted, didn't want to do it. But
yeah.
I don't know, 3 or 4 years ago, maybe less, he decided, I'm going to do it.
Hmm.
And he's writing some great songs. And I was talking to him the other day, and I said, you know, you are developing so quickly, and these things are already so good. If you keep going, if you keep getting better, man, you really could be big. And you know what he said?
What?
Dude, why would I want to fuck up my life and get big?
And that's fair. That's fair,
Yeah, yeah,
because it's always there are there are people who I'm a fan of who have kind of had a rough go because of their
yeah,
notoriety. So I
yeah.
was lucky enough, I was able to produce a record with John Hampton, who had produced like Gin Blossoms and Aaron Tippin, guys
Mhm.
like that. And he would tell stories about, like some of these guys. I mean, the dude from the Gin Blossoms, killed himself, shortly after that record came out, and it's like, you can be really talented and be well-meaning, and sometimes the demons still get you.
Yeah,
And sometimes the demon is the life. It's the lifestyle of
yeah,
a creative person. And I've been very fortunate that I've really not had a lot of people trying to boss me around and tell me what to do with what I'm doing. And I've known other people who have been in a position where they're taking orders from and molding their sound based on what the business guys want them to do. And that life seems awful to me. That seems like something I would almost immediately screw up. I would probably
Yeah.
rebel against it and ruin my deal pretty soon. So I don't know that my career could have unfolded any differently than it has, just based on that. But then again, who the hell knows?
Who the hell knows?
And there's also a thing where, do you know Grayson Capps? He's a
Yeah.
songwriter out at New Orleans. I was talking with him, and he had a thing where his dad had written a novel, and it had stayed in a drawer for years, and he had sent it to all these publishers. Nothing had happened. So that his dad dies. Years later, he's talking to this documentary filmmaker who's happens to film them, his band in a place. And he goes, my dad wrote this, book. I'm curious if you'd be able to make something out of it. And they took it, and about 2 years later, they called him. It's like, this is really great. We're going to make this movie. And if you want to do the soundtrack, it's called A Love Song for Bobby Long. It had John Travolta. And so this book that no one gave a damn about, for decades, and then suddenly it becomes a thing. A little part of my brain kind of holds out for, like, at some point, somebody might stumble upon something I've done and go,
Sure.
this could be, even if it's just throw it on a soundtrack or whatever.
Yeah. You can't help but think that way. Maybe the ultimate in what we're talking about is Jack Kerouac.
Well, yeah.
Fame ruined his life.
Yeah,
It
right.
ruined his life. And he allowed that to happen. But hey, man, let me back up and let's do a little biography. Let's do a biography. I normally start kind of with that, but your webpage biography starts off with the lines.
It's really long.
Born and raised in rural Texas,
Mhm.
Matthew spent the 90s in a variety of rock bands around Dallas-Fort Worth. He moved to New York in 2002 to begin a solo career as The Matthew Show, eventually moving operations back to DFW area in 2006. Now, one thing that you don't have there is what happened between the time you were born and raised in Fort Worth area and 90s when you were in bands. What were you like? What were you like as a kid, Matthew?
Oh my gosh. So, well, extremely nerdy. I was very much the person who was on the outside always. And that, I think that informs my songwriting a lot, because I'm never writing from a position of someone who's in the cool group. I'm always, writing from the outside of somebody who's kind of, my view is skewed that way. But I was also just wildly enthusiastic about creating things. So my God at that time was Weird Al Yankovic. And so I tried to write parodies. I wrote parodies all the time and to try to kind of get close to that.
How old were you at that time?
I was probably junior high. And then, so one thing that happened, so I was born here in Fort Worth. We lived in Fort Worth for several years, and then we moved to Weatherford, which is a rural, at the time it was rural, it's not anymore,
Right.
out west of here, when I was 10. And so that kind of altered my perspective a little bit too, because we were living on 3 acres out in the sticks. And so there was a lot of open space and a lot of places to ponder about stuff. And it was about that time that I was discovering, like, the Dr. Demento show. Was a radio show that was on at the time.
Sure.
And I would record every single episode and listen. And that was how I discovered Tom Waits and Lyle Lovett,
Frank Zappa.
Frank Zappa, all these acts that were way off the center mark of what was on pop radio at the time. And those became, between that and kind of falling in with some folks who were giving me mixtapes of, like, Pink Floyd and Primus and stuff that was off the regular map that I knew, I developed kind of a very strange sense of musicality, and a very genreless sense of it. I liked country music as much as I liked prog rock, as much as I liked folk. So to me, that's one of the main marketing problems I've always had, is that I don't just do one thing. And so sometimes the country people will like one song and then the
Yeah.
rock people will like another one.
I've suffered from that too, but one thing
Yeah.
I have found is that just in the last, I don't know, 5, 7 years, that
Mhm.
has changed a lot. There's no
Mhm.
longer quite the
So
pressure to stay in your lane, you know?
here's the thing is I have an 18-year-old daughter, and she doesn't care about genres at all. And I don't think
Right,
that's my influence. I think that's
right.
just that generation.
Yeah,
They
agreed.
she will listen to Woody Guthrie and then listen to like speed metal, and like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
and
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 that's so
then
cool.
in but in my day, back in the 80s, especially at least in Weatherford, you were defined by the music you listened to. Like you were either a goth or
Right,
a hair
right.
metal guy or a
Yeah,
roper.
yeah,
And when I went to work in record stores later, so in college, I went to go work at a record store over in Fort Worth, and you've seen the movie High Fidelity, with
sure.
John Cusack. It
Yeah,
was exactly that. Like you had people that were the purists, well, no, this is not punk, but this is,
right, right.
and that was I guess it's a very Gen X thing to define yourself by a music type. I think the new folks, and to their credit, they don't care.
Yeah.
If they like it, they like it.
I can even remember, and I'm older than you, but I can remember in the 60s feeling the pressure. You got to be a Beatles or a Stones guy. You got to choose
Yeah,
one. And I
absolutely.
remember, and I remember saying, "Hell no! I love them both. I'm not going to choose one. And
And
if you
even
want to
within
fight me
that,
about that, that's fine."
and even within that, you have the John people and the Paul people, right?
That's true.
I
That's
still have
true.
those arguments with people who are
Yeah,
like,
the
oh
Brian
no,
Jones people and the
yeah.
Mick and Keith people.
Well,
Yeah,
and I being a big Pink Floyd fan, I still run into people who are like, well, anything after Sid
Sid.
Barrett is
Right.
trash.
That's right. Yeah.
And so there's all these record store nerd arguments that I used to kind of get embroiled in, and I was always sort of on the outside going, why are we arguing about this? Like,
Yeah.
either you like the thing or you don't. And
Yeah.
it took me a while to kind of become zen about it, about just, what? It's fine. We can
Yeah.
disagree, and but going back to kind of the upbringing, like I was Weatherford is a weird place because it's close enough to Fort Worth that a lot of the guys who work at Lockheed and whatnot will live out there.
Yeah.
And so there was actually a fair number of smart people out there, in amongst all kind of the meth types and whatnot. And so that kind of led to me bumping into some interesting folks, and
Sure.
some of them were the folks that I ended up getting involved musically with later, because we were the misfits. We were the ones that didn't really fit with what was going on. And so I formed my first band in 1991, and we were terrible, but we were trying really hard to kind of make the sounds that we were hearing. And I think about that period, like 91, 92. What was alternative music up until 1992 was stuff like The Cure, Peter Murphy,
Yeah.
the Pixies, stuff like that. But then 1992 hits and you get Smells Like Teen Spirit, and suddenly everything is grunge. And I was still trying to make the old alternative. I was still
Ah,
trying to make the jangly
yeah.
REM type of stuff. And
Ah,
I hit the market at exactly the wrong time, because I was making the stuff that nobody wanted to hear
right.
by that point. So that was
Are
my first marketing mistake.
were you trained as a musician? Is it something that's totally
Um,
self-taught? How did that happen?
no, it's half and half. So I was in marching band in high school, and learned I played saxophone all through
Okay.
junior high and high school and college. I got an acting scholarship, um, to pay for the classes, but then I got a music scholarship to pay for the books. So I was in jazz band at Weatherford College. And you wouldn't think that Weatherford College would have a great jazz band, but we had a really good director. And what he would do, he would go over to the Dallas Arts Magnet High School,
Sure.
and he would, anyone who hadn't already gotten a UNT scholarship, he would give them a Weatherford College scholarship.
There you go.
So
Yeah.
I was in this band with these fantastic players that made me have to step up my game, which was probably the best thing I could do. Aiden Bubeck was the bass player at that time. He went on to play with Miranda Lambert and Bertha Coolidge and a lot of these, so there was some powerhouse players in that thing. And I had to figure out you know, get my stuff together. And so that was, and it also taught me how to improvise, which I feel like has been a huge help in me doing some sideman stuff over the years, because sometimes you have to step in to a situation where you're not as familiar with the material as you'd like to be, but you could still pull it off by knowing where to go in, where to go out. And when I was playing in that hillbilly band, it was, they would take off on some weird tangents, and I would just kind of have to ride the wave and see where we ended up. And that's been I credit Weatherford College for helping me to do that.
Nice. Favorite sax player?
I like Cannonball Adderley. He was so a lot of people listen to Miles Davis kind of blue, and they talk about Coltrane.
There it is.
And
Right here. There's kind of
yeah,
blue.
yeah. And there's
Yeah.
nothing wrong with Coltrane's playing, but to me, Adderley kind of stuck out more because he was a little more melodic. Um, I also grew up with like Boots Randolph, you know, and
Sure.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
The sax players who were popular when I was playing were guys like Kenny G and what's the guy's name? Oh, I know. There were like pop sax players. Well,
Sure.
and of course in the 80s, that was the era of the sax solo and
Spyro Gyra and bands
absolutely.
like that. Yeah.
And then and it was interesting because you went from that to being the 90s where you better not bring a saxophone on stage unless you're Morphine, you know.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was a weird so the sax I was taught formally, but then when I went to start playing guitar, I did have a grounding in music theory from that,
Yeah.
but I never really learned guitar formally. I just kind of tinkered until I figured it out. Which
Oh, go ahead.
I started playing guitar very late, actually about 17 years old. A lot of the people that I talked to started a lot earlier than that. So it took me a while to really figure out what I was doing on there, especially since I was kind of a stubborn kid and I didn't take a lot of advice. There were people who tried to help me, be like, "Hey, maybe you could do it this way," and I'd be like, "No, no, no, I know what I'm doing." And had I not done that, I probably would have learned a lot quicker. Gerald Ray, who he sold me my first guitar out at Craig's Music in Weatherford, and I'm fortunate enough that he now plays with me on gigs periodically. But he offered me he was clever enough to slip in bits of advice without making it sound bossy, and so I would accept those tidbits from him.
Nice.
He's one of the best guitar players I know. So I've had a lot of I have absorbed a lot of lessons from watching people and from kind of figuring out, oh, that's the way you can do that. But it's such a long cumulative process the way I did it, which I don't know if I'd recommend it. But
How old were you when you wrote your first song that you said, "Wait a second,
um,
this is a good song." This
yeah,
because we all
my
write
first.
we
Oh
all
yeah,
write shit songs when we first start because we're
of
trying to figure
course,
out what the hell to do. But how
right.
old were you when you said, "Okay, wait a minute, that's a good song"?
Well, so there's where the arrogant bastard part comes in, is that like I thought that about my first songs. I thought, wow, these are great. Uh, and it wasn't until a couple years later that I went, okay, these are not great. These are okay.
Isn't it great? Yeah.
Uh, but I felt like just the fact that I had made something that wasn't a parody, right? It was because that's all I'd written before.
Yeah.
But just that I made an actual heartfelt tune that expressed what I wanted to express and that was more or less musically sound. I do the thing that I even back then that I had was a facility for melody. So even if the lyrics were kind of garbage, the melody was good.
Uh-huh.
And some of those I've actually kind of gone back and stolen bits from and reworked them.
Sure.
I in the back of my head I have a project that I don't know if I'll ever get around to, but just basically a rescue project for some of those old songs to be like, let's go
Nice.
back and get the good bits,
Yeah.
rehabilitate them,
Yeah.
and make them into good songs. Because I do think some of those melodies, they still pop up in my head and I go,
Yeah.
I wish that was a better song.
And maybe some of the lyrics too, you can cherry pick and
Yeah,
find,
every
okay,
now and
that
then.
line was actually good. Yeah, I've done that for sure. Well, let's see. You are primarily releasing singles these days. I know you've got 3 full lengths, Texas,
Yeah.
in Memphis. I kind of want to ask you
Uh-huh.
about those.
Yeah.
You got a new album coming out,
Spring probably.
2025. Okay. I don't know if you came up with this term or someone else said this about you, called what you do cerebral pop.
Yes.
Okay.
That's a term I've tinkered with monikers for it. Nerd pop was one. Cerebral pop I landed on because I think that the through line in everything that I do is that it's multisyllabic, it's thoughtful,
Clearly.
it's not it's not hanging out and drinking with your buddies music. It's more it tends to be more contemplative and thinky.
Yep.
Um,
Yep.
so that's kind of why I decided to call it that. And also because if you don't know what the word cerebral means, it's probably not for you.
That's right. Yeah. Yeah. Has
So sometimes, yeah.
anyone ever told you you sometimes sound a bit like James McMurtry?
Yes, that has happened before, and I've met people who have been in his band before, and they're like, "Yeah, you sound like James."
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is interesting though because over the years, it's kind of evolved the things that I get told I sound like.
Yeah.
So for years, I was told I sounded like either Ian Anderson or Lou Reed,
Wow.
and then
I've gotten Lou Reed actually.
yeah, and then I was told that I sounded like, God, who was it? There was somebody local that I was told I sounded. Then I was told I sounded like Neil Diamond,
Oh,
uh, which is odd.
yeah.
But I have gotten the McMurtry thing more than once from local people, people who have a wide musical vocabulary. So
There's
I'm
there's
fine
something
with
about,
those.
yeah, yeah.
That's
How
fine.
about your vocal delivery? There really is
Yeah.
something about your vocal delivery I mean, your voice does sound a little bit like him, but it's also there's just something about, and
It can be a delivery
he's a
thing.
very cerebral writer as well.
Oh, absolutely. And that's
Yeah.
what I say. I'm definitely not mad about it.
Yeah.
I feel like sometimes the Lou Reed thing strikes people because I'm kind of a conversational singer.
Uh-huh.
I don't always, uh, I'm not flashy. I
Right.
don't have the pipes that just kind of all over I don't do the Chris Stapleton thing or anything like that. I just kind of deliver it in a way that I feel like is as me as possible, which is conversational
Yeah.
and a little bit kind of pulling you aside going, hey, did you notice that? And so
Right.
that's, which is also a very McMurtry thing to do. So,
Sure. Sure. Tell me about the song "Bring Me Safely Down."
okay. So that was one of those. I first wrote it back in 98 with my old band, the Civilians, but they didn't want to do it because it was a sad bastard piano ballad. And it was not what we were aiming for. And also the original lyrics to it were okay, but they weren't. That was one of those that got rehabilitated a bit.
Yeah.
So broke up that band, go to work on this new Matthew Show record, and I'm like, that melody is in my head. And I happened to have a situation where my buddy Jason Jackson was he was doing some dumb shit at the time, and I was really mad at him. But I also admired him a lot. He was one of the guys was in my first band and was one of those that should have been a lot bigger than he was. And so I wrote that song just kind of going, look, come on, we've got this talent, we've got this ability, we need to do something with it. And it was sort of a pleading type of song.
Mhm.
And when I did it from that lens, it got to be a better song. And when I put it out on my first album on Texas, I got a lot of really good response to it. It got overshadowed a little bit by the Office Suite song because that one, which is the polar opposite, is just a goofy rant about office stuff but it happened to get like 500,000 views on this YouTube video that somebody put up. But Bring Me Safely Down is probably the one that I've gotten the most emails about over the years, where somebody said, this that helped me through a tough time I was having, and that makes me feel like it did what it was supposed to do.
Well, man, I got to tell you, I hesitate a little bit to say this because it's always interesting to me when someone says, my favorite song of yours is that song, and they'll mention a song that's 10 years old. I'm kind of
Yeah,
like,
of course.
yeah, I like your old stuff, But
And that happens, and I'm
I got
cool.
to tell you, as I'm listening to your songs, I keep wanting to go back and listen to that song. Man, it is so good, and
Thank
I
you so
picture
much.
it. It's almost like I could see almost stadium full of people and lighters singing almost like an anthem kind of thing, for sure.
I had this before he died. I had this fever dream that I was going to try to get a hold of Ray Charles's people and have him sing it.
Wow.
And but that of course didn't happen.
Wouldn't
But
that be something? Yeah.
yeah. Well, and I'll tell you this. So I don't get covered a lot, and that's kind of a thing that bums me out a little bit. But when I do, it's always extremely exciting. And the song, that's not one of the ones anyone has covered yet, and I'm waiting for it. I feel like somebody will probably grab hold of that one.
Yeah.
The one that gets covered the most is Poison Picking Time.
Okay.
And then, but the one that I was most happy with the cover of what you was one that Ed Rogers and Chris did, and Sam the Lion. They did Union Station.
Yeah.
They didn't record it, but if you see them do that live, that's my favorite version of that song.
Oh, wow. Cool.
So yeah, it's interesting to hear your material filtered through somebody else's lens.
Yeah,
And
for sure.
I feel like Bring Me Safely Down is one of those that could be filtered through a different lens pretty
I agree.
easily.
I agree. You know, speaking of Ed, just a quick comment about him. I love that man.
Hmm.
You know,
Oh God, yeah.
he came down here. I'm in Bryan College Station. He came down here this past weekend. I played a couple of shows at a benefit, and my I've had an interesting situation with bands, and I don't have a guitar player right now, lead
Mhm.
guitar player. And I called Ed and I said, "You want to come down and play guitar this thing?"
Mhm.
He said, "Sure." So first time we played together, well, I played with Ed, but first time I played with the bass player and the drummer was the show. I
Yeah.
mean, not even 5 minutes before, literally
Oh
the first.
no.
He crushed it,
Of
man.
course you
And
did. Of course you
his
did.
guitar playing has improved so much over just the last, I don't know, 3 or 4 years.
Well, that's you can thank Sam the Lion for that because that band, they are kind of our brother band.
Yeah.
Like, we actually share a practice space
Oh, no
that
kidding.
we split between us. And so, yeah, that, and we also, the Matthew Show and Sam the Lion kind of sprang from this scene that developed around this place called McHenry's in the aughts.
Uh-huh.
And that's where I met Ed. That's where I've met
Recently
several of,
had a reunion kind of thing,
yeah,
right? Yeah.
yeah. And it was very special because you start to realize, God, how many of these people in this scene have I met through that place? And then, of course, there were spin-off places that came out afterwards, which further developed everybody. I've been in this scene now long enough to have watched people's trajectories, from just being the new guy on the block to kind of being the veteran. And Ed is one of those that our trajectories are kind of similar because we both put out our first album in 2003. We both have been in a variety of different bands.
Yep.
We both get called on to do lead guitar for people.
Yeah.
Um, and we both have odd songwriting styles that sometimes are hard for people to cover. I actually cover one of his tunes called 100. That is one that he's never put out, but that I feel like is a really good tune. And that's another thing about him is that sometimes you kind of have to convince him that something he's doing is good.
Mm.
And I feel like with Sam, it's easier to do that because he can say, "Oh, well, it's us. It's not just me,"
Gotcha. Yeah.
And but if he's watching this, waiting for the next Ed Rogers solo album. So
I'll bet he will. Man, I try to keep these things under an hour, and I can't believe we've already been going for what, 30 some minutes, 40 minutes.
that's all right.
I think we could talk forever, and maybe what I'll ask you to do, because I mean, there's so much we could talk about.
Sure.
One of the things that, maybe I'll just ask you if you don't mind.
Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe we'll wait until your new record comes out, and we'll do installment 2 to kind of
Yeah,
promote that a little bit. But let's keep
that's great.
going for now.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a little bit about. Well, I tell you what I want to do. I want to ask you some rapid fire questions,
Okay, do it.
and then want to come back to songwriting.
All right.
So, who have you never shared a stage with that you would like to?
Oh my gosh. Well, James McMurtry is a good one. That
Okay.
would be a good
Yeah.
person to do. I would like to play. I'm a huge Toad the Wet Sprocket fan. I would like to open for them at some point. A lot of the bands that I'm a big fan of, aren't together anymore or have kind of gone by the wayside. But um, gosh, Paramore. I love Paramore. I would love to do something with, like, if Haley ever does another solo tour or anything like that. Um, I'm fortunate that actually I've been able to share a stage with people who I admire. Little Jack Melody was kind of my
Oh,
musical
cool.
godfather when I was coming up, and I've managed to do shows with him.
Nice.
Um, I've also had some really weird pairings, like I was on with Gogol Bordello and did a show with Drowning Pool back when they were getting started, which is not that was a bad lineup. It's because we didn't sound anything like that. But yeah, I think Toad would be top of my list. Maybe Gin Blossoms, maybe uh, Cake. Cake would be beautiful. I
Yeah.
love those guys. Um, but yeah, that's probably my big wish list at the moment, that of people who are either still alive and still making stuff.
Uh, most memorable shows, and I know this is another one of
Whew.
those really difficult questions, and
Yeah,
and if you thought about it, you come up with something else. But what comes to mind first shows that you've attended? What is
shows
the
that
what a show that you just go, oh man, that I'll never forget that.
Roger Waters, The Wall.
Okay.
The first time I saw that at American Airlines Center in Dallas, God, it was probably a decade or so ago. That for being a Floyd person, first of all, but secondly, what they were doing visually with that took it to a level that I had never even imagined.
Yeah.
So even if it was not the full Pink Floyd, it was absolutely the spirit of it, and that was a bucket list show that I'm glad I caught.
And
Um,
that was only a decade ago?
Something like might have been a little longer than
Because
that. I can't
I know
remember.
I saw that show and I think I might have seen it in Dallas, but it seems
Yeah,
like 20 years ago.
it was late aughts. I know that,
Okay.
or yeah, somewhere
All right.
thereabouts.
Okay.
Because I first saw Waters shortly after I got back from New York, and so that was 07, 08, somewhere thereabout. So it might have been 09, 2010, somewhere thereabout. But yeah, that, as far as big shows go, that's the one that kind of sticks in my brain. As far as small shows go, uh, I was very lucky to catch Sarah Hickman when she was kind of at her peak in the mid '90s, and she would play a lot at the Caravan of Dreams. And every time I saw a show at the Caravan of Dreams, it was among the best shows that I've ever seen. And she was one that really made that place shine. And so I was lucky to kind of catch. That was at the time where she had just been dropped from her label and she was trying to self-produce. Uh, uh, it's funny because she was buying the master tapes from him, and this record had basically King Crimson on it. It had Tony Levin and Adrian Belew, and um, but the label was like, and so it it's one of those things. I would say almost any show I saw Caravan of Dreams is fantastic, but hers stuck out a lot.
Nice. I feel compelled. This is not about me, it's about you, but I feel compelled to tell you a quick story that I know
Yeah.
you're gonna appreciate. When I was very young, I want to say it was 1969, but I can't say that with certainty. And you might correct me on the date, actually. Uh, I went to see Grand Funk Railroad. I
Okay.
was a big Grand Funk fan.
Hmm.
And I don't know, I was 13, right? And I'm waiting for the show. It was this big hall in Kansas City where they took all the chairs out and they put AstroTurf down on the,
Mm.
trying to recreate Woodstock or something, you know. People are sitting cross-legged trying to pretend like they were, outside at a festival or something. Very bizarre as I look back on it.
That's kind
But
of fun.
right, but a guy comes up to the microphone and he says, "Hey folks, we got some bad news. The opening act is not going to make it tonight. Apparently they got their truck hijacked, all their equipment's got hijacked, and we've got a replacement band, but if anyone's here to see them, you can go back to the ticket booth right now and get a refund and leave." And I looked around, a handful of people, not very many people. A few people did get up and go, but very, very few. We were there to see Grand Funk.
Mhm.
Well, guess who the opening act was? Who didn't show up?
I don't know.
Pink
I can't
Floyd.
imagine. Oh man, that's fantastic.
And I'm
And
thinking
that would
out
have been a hell of a time to see him too, because that's Sid era. So
it,
yeah, that
it's
would have been.
do you know when their first US tour? I think it was their first US tour.
It was, yeah, because Piper at the Gates of Dawn came out in '67. Um, gosh, that might have actually been the first tour they did. That might have been just after Sid left. Because
Yeah,
I'm
I'm
trying to
thinking
remember.
too. I actually, is it Umaguma?
Umaguma.
When did that
That
record come
was,
out?
I feel like that was either 69 or 70.
I think that record had just come out, so
Okay.
it probably was 69.
Okay, so that was definitely Gilmore era. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, but that was early days. That was real early
Man,
days.
I came that close. You know, to see, I didn't even
Well,
realize at the time. Okay, most memorable show you've played.
I will say this. So the one God, I've played so many shows. There was one that stuck out to me. I got invited. I don't know if you're familiar with the show Firefly. It's a science fiction show that was on in the early aughts. Well, there are still fan groups around, and there's a group called the North Texas Browncoats, and they were doing a benefit show. And so I went and I led 150 people in singing The Hero of Canton from the episode Janestown. And we made a world record of the largest number of people singing that song in unison.
Yeah, I would say that's memorable.
So that was pretty cool. But I will say, uh, the other one that sticks out to me was we got to I want to tell this right. So this was in the mid '90s. We were playing at Club Dada in Deep Ellum, and the show itself was not all that remarkable. We did okay, but afterwards we got off. We were the last band, so we just kind of left our gear up there for a minute while we got a drink. Bunch of dudes come in and they're like, "Hey, these are the guys from Blues Traveler. They kind of just want to jam. So can they use your instruments?" I was like, "Sure." So they just got up and
Wow,
just jammed on our gear there at the Club Tunnel, which was kind of crazy.
cool.
And what they, one of the songs they played was "Time" by Pink Floyd. So they were playing all non-Blues Traveler songs, just to kind of fart around. So that was kind of a fun show.
What are you listening to now? What's on your playlist right now?
So, I've been really enjoying, and people are going to hate me for this, but I'm really enjoying the new Linkin Park single, with their new vocalist. I'm a huge fan of her previous band, Dead Sarah, and so I've kind of been revisiting some of that stuff. I've been really into churches, and kind of some of the more there's a little bit of an '80s throwback thing happening in tunes right now, and I'm not against it necessarily. There's some stuff that's interesting to me. Um, but yeah, I'm kind of, it's hard to know how far to go back because I say I'm listening to the what's used to be the new Paramore record. It's not new anymore. It's been out a couple years. Dawes, I'm a really big fan of Dawes. They've got a new album out that I haven't heard the whole thing of, but I'm much looking forward to that one.
Okay.
Everything I've heard off of it right now sounds really good.
Have you listened to the new Gillian Welch, David Rawlings record?
No, but that has been recommended to me, and that's on the list.
Oh, good man.
No,
It's
that well, they don't put out bad records. So
No, they don't. So let's see. What do you like most about living in Fort Worth?
the music community, and I am old enough to remember when I couldn't say that. So back in the '90s, it was pretty sparse, and it felt a little more uh, cutthroat. By the time I got back from New York in the mid aughts, it felt like the scene had changed a little bit, and there was a lot more collaboration going on. And I feel like now is probably the best, apart from the fact that our music venues keep closing. Apart from that, the collaboration and the sense of camaraderie in the Fort Worth music scene is, I've never felt that anywhere else. And I don't think Dallas has it really. They've got lots of talented people, but I've confirmed that with people who aren't from here who've been like, "Wow, you guys really feel like you're a community." I'm like, "We
That's
we
cool.
really are."
Yeah.
So I'm very fortunate to be here at this time.
Right. Nice. What do you like least about it?
I don't like that the clubs keep closing.
Yeah.
We've had 4 major music venues closed in the past a year and a half or so, and people are having to improvise. We're having to figure out other places to play that are not traditional music venues, and that is really an issue that we're trying to solve. There have been town halls that we've had about it.
Really?
Yeah, so it's a big issue, and no one really knows what to do about it just yet. But what has happened with like places like Pouring Glory is when places say, hey, we're about to close, the community leaps in and tries to support them and keep them afloat. So I feel like the community's trying its hardest to make sure it doesn't happen anymore. But that's real hard to do, because it can't just be the same 1,000 people who keep everything running.
Right.
You know.
Right. I'm skipping around a little bit, but
Yeah,
one
go
thing
ahead.
I forgot to ask you about, but I want to ask you about is, so you put out Texas in 2003,
Yep.
February 2008, Memphis in 2012. You seem to be in that interim, although you are working on a new album now, you said, but in that
Yeah,
interim, you put out a lot of singles.
I did, because I thought that February was going to be my last album, because about that time it felt like everyone was just consuming singles, and
Yeah.
albums weren't really a thing. Memphis, that sort of happened by accident. I got invited to go to Folk Alliance in Memphis, and at the very last minute before I left, I responded to an email that they had sent out saying, hey, the first 8 people who respond to this get 2 hours of free studio time at Arden Studios, which is where like Led Zeppelin 3 and a lot of those early ZZ Top records were made. Plus, that Gin Blossoms record I was talking about. So I was like, oh, maybe I'll throw it in. So we got 2 free hours of studio time.
Wow.
So on the last day we were there, we just went in, we just played 10 songs. And the engineer, Adam Hill, was like, you know what? Y'all did that well enough. If you want, you can come back here and mix it. That's an album.
Nice.
And so we did a little fundraiser, and I went back later that year, and it was an album. So but in my head it's a live album, because there's hardly any overdubs on it whatsoever. It's just us just rocking out in that space.
You know,
So but yeah.
it I've had this conversation with several of my guests. It's inevitable that people just consume singles now. But man, is the album dead? I mean,
Well, I say, so here's the deal. I've said that before, but then you have people like Billie Eilish who are putting out albums and who prefer albums to singles.
Taylor.
Yeah, Taylor Swift is still
Yeah,
putting out albums.
yeah,
So I don't think it's dead. I think there are artists who excel more at that form, and
mm,
then artists who it really doesn't matter. They're going to
yeah,
put out singles, and it's not really any different than if you're putting an album out. But if you do an album with an mindset to do an album, I feel like that comes through and it makes a difference. So,
it's so important.
for instance, my one of my other bands is Hook the Destroyer, which is kind of a prog types thing, and we always do albums, because for prog, that's
Sure.
expected. You're gonna have
Yeah,
a theme throughout.
yeah,
But with the Matthew Show, I was always just making little ditties, and I thought, well, I don't know if they cohere into a thing that I'm going to fight to have an album.
got you.
With this one, there are themes that are shot throughout all of the songs, so it feels more important to me that they be grouped in a
Mhm,
collection.
mhm.
And it's also kind of my last shot to be like, I don't know, let's just see if an album
Sure,
has any traction or not.
sure.
uh,
What do you when the Matthew Show has a show, and I know you're playing out a lot. I've
yeah.
noticed
Oh
that.
yeah.
What do you have merchandise? Do you have I still have
I wish.
CDs. I still have CDs.
And then this is the thing
I've
about me.
I had them
So I try.
forever, and I'm going
Yeah.
to keep bringing them to shows until they're
Yeah.
gone, which it may be another 10 years. And occasionally someone will say, I'll buy one to support you, but I don't even have a CD player.
Yeah.
And I haven't invested the money to put something on vinyl, because,
No.
you know, you got to buy 300 or 400
Mhm.
copies of it to even begin to make sense. And I'm not going to sell more than 30 or 40. So,
Yeah.
what are you doing there? What's your
Well,
ideas?
I'm in a bit of a crossroads right now, because, like you said, CDs ain't moving.
Mhm.
They're not. Now I did try a thing where I would put my entire catalog on a flash drive, and they could buy that. But
Nice.
I think people are less interested in owning it now. I think they're interested in having access to stream it.
Yep.
So as far as music goes, you know, at the show merch ain't really a thing anymore. What I'm trying to develop, and it's a slow going, but I need things that aren't music. I need things that are t-shirts and
Yep.
stickers and koozies and stuff like that. That is, I'm obstinate enough that I've been stubborn to try to get that rolling, because I feel like, well, people should be buying albums, but they don't. So I have to I have to
How's
come
that
up with an
working for you?
alternate. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and in other bands that I've been in, like, when I was in Shotgun Friday, we had shirts that sold like gangbusters. So like, I know it can work. You just have to do that initial investment and hope
Right.
that and you have to keep up with the sizes. You're like, well, we ran out of larges,
Yeah.
do I have
It's
to
not,
make another big
it's not
order
that,
to get,
it's not that bad though, man. You don't
yeah,
have to be supremely organized with it. You just buy a bunch of t-shirts and
yeah.
what I got,
Well, and
and
also,
people.
I got a little taste of it when so my collaborator in Apuk the Destroyer is a guy who lives in Serbia. And so we flew him over for a couple of shows here as part of a psychedelic Panther Fest. And we made some shirts especially for the
Cool.
thing, and we sold every one of them.
Yeah.
So I know it works. I just have to get
Yeah.
after it when I'm
Right.
not doing all these other things.
Man, let's wrap. I hate that we haven't even gotten to half the stuff I want to talk to you about, but again,
All right,
we'll do
we
a
can
part two.
reconvene.
We'll do a part two down the road. Let's finish with a couple more questions.
Yeah.
Pet peeves. What pisses you off these days?
Lazy writing. I feel like often. So I go to a lot of, you know, I'll go to open mics and, song circles and things like that. And I'm lucky that most of the people that I know that go to those things are talented people. And so, but every now and then you'll get the guy or even the famous person sometimes, like sometimes the thing that's on the radio and you hear it and you go, what a lazy lyric that is. I mean, you could have written so much better. That's why I'm an admirer of people like Lyle Lovett, who he never picks the easy rhyme. He always picks the rhyme that's just off to the side here that you wouldn't have thought of.
Yeah.
And that, to me, that's what we're in this for, is to trigger synapses and to go, ooh, that's interesting. But when
Yes.
you have the same,
Uh-huh.
when you can predict the next line before it even happens, I
Yeah.
feel like you're being lazy. So maybe that's
Bro
just me.
country, man. Bro country.
Oh my God. So
Senoritas and margaritas, and pickup.
well, and of course I'm in Red Dirt Central around here,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it it's odd because I play a lot of the same places that those people play,
Uh-huh.
but the thing that I'm doing is not even close to
Right.
what they're doing. So sometimes their fans are there
Uh-huh.
and they're just kind of looking at me like, what is this?
Right.
And I really try not to be snooty about it, but I'm just kind of like, you know, I know that they're going where the money is. I know that these guys who are writing the Texas country and all that stuff,
Yeah.
they're fulfilling a role that it's a preset audience that's already there.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's only when my stuff is put up juxtaposed next to it that I realize just how far apart we are. So
Yeah.
there's a radio station here in town that mostly plays that stuff, but they asked to play one of my singles on it for this little call-in competition thing. So they did it, and then but before and after my song had nothing to do with my song. Like,
Right.
it was just,
Yeah.
we were in completely different universes. So
Somebody asked me recently, they approached me and said that they know the talent buyer for a rodeo in San Antonio and would I be interested in maybe playing there. And I said, man, I'm not even going to bother, because I guarantee you that talent buyer is going to listen to what I do and
yeah.
say, these weird poem songs are definitely not what we want here at the rodeo.
Yeah.
This is maybe a little personal question,
Right.
or maybe not. Do you have any particular guiding philosophy or spiritual leanings that help you get through the bullshit
It's
of
interesting.
day to
Yeah,
day?
it's interesting because so I'm not a subscriber to any official thing, but I have tended to drift more towards nuggets of wisdom from a lot of different spiritual traditions. One of which that I'm trying really hard attach to is there's a Buddhist thing, which is that the thing that causes suffering is the gap between expectation and reality.
Mm.
And so the idea is to not have expectations. The idea is just to do the thing and just let the reality be the reality. That way you don't get disappointed when it doesn't meet up to your expectations. That's really hard for me to do, because when you're making something, you obviously want it to be, something important. But sometimes there's a certain amount of relief in that it not being important. So
Right.
there's two, somebody had said this, there's two ways of looking at our place in the universe, and you can go, oh, wow, I'm really small.
Mhm.
That sucks that I'm really small. Or you can go, phew, thank God I'm really small.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah,
And I'm trying to be much more like the latter,
yeah,
just like God, my place in world history is such a little tiny,
right,
and
right.
world history in the context of the universe is such a
Yeah,
little tiny. It's like, why am I stressing? Why am I
exactly.
stressing out about this? But it's hard. It's hard because
It's hard.
the little ego kicks in,
Yeah,
and if you can fight that bugger off, you're doing okay.
yeah. Good luck with that. The the Buddhist expectations thing, the kind of pop phrase, admittedly a bit of a pop phrase, but one that I lean on a lot is let go of the outcome.
Yeah, yeah.
Let go of the outcome.
And
Just
that's one of those things where
do
I've
what you're
I've been,
doing, be in this moment, doing what you're
yeah.
doing, be fully embodied in this moment, and don't it what's going to happen is going to happen. Let go of that, you
There
know.
was a so David Mitchell is one of my favorite authors, and I think it's either in Cloud Atlas, or it's in Ghost Written, one of his books. But anyway, there's this character he's talking about, you know, I kept thinking when I would have a really, when I would have a really big experience, I would go, okay, this is the beginning. This is the beginning of me living a life that's like this. But then that moment passes, and then you go to stuff that's less exciting, and you realize, oh, that was it. that,
Yeah,
that was the big experience.
right.
And so when I've tried to be cognizant of when I'm having a really cool experience, to
Mhm.
just go, instead of thinking, oh, okay, this is my entree into having more of these, just appreciate the experience for what it is, because
Yeah,
that thing may not happen again.
yeah,
And there's a lot of reasons why it might not, but for no other reason than that it's a really cool experience. So just have it.
right.
And one of the things I'm proudest of as a parent is that I feel like I've inculcated that idea into my kiddo,
Great.
where she's less about gathering stuff and more about gathering experiences.
Nice.
And I feel like that's probably a lesson that I could have learned a little earlier, and that I try to live by now.
Beautiful. That's a great way to finish up here, man. There's so much again we didn't talk about. We didn't talk
Yeah,
about writing your novels, and I know you have a new novel in the works and a new
yeah,
album. We're going to do part two. We're going to talk about both of
yeah.
those. But for right now, let's let go of that outcome and
Well,
and
exactly.
be here in this moment and just say, Matthew Broyles, thank you, man, so much for
Yeah,
taking the time to connect. I really
of
appreciate it. I've
course.
enjoyed talking to you. I look forward to crossing paths with you in the future.
Yeah, and for anyone interested in knowing where the heck you find all this stuff, you can always go to thematthewshow.com. Everything that I've got is up there, or it's linked from there, and you
And
can you
I'll
can do
put that
your own research.
and when this goes out live here in a couple of weeks on YouTube, I'll put that link there in the show notes.
Fantastic. All
All right,
right.
man.
Thank you so much for
Take
reaching
care.
out. I appreciate it. Good stuff.